I've recently used TikTok to find some new flat earthers, so I thought, you know what? I'm going to do the same to find someone for Tinfoil Tuesday. And it didn't take long. I found someone. He's called Jesse Speaks, and he's an anti-evolution guy. Get ready for some tinfoil TikTok. Hello all and welcome along to another episode of Tinfoil Tuesday with me, Simon Dan. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you're all fully recovered from last week's epic haul of videos. I actually really enjoyed the whole process. It was tiring, but well worth it. And I'm seriously thinking about producing more videos each week. But obviously that's something I will keep you all updated with, and I will of course keep you posted. Right, on with today's video and the TikToker known as Jesse Speaks. Now, he may or may not have a presence elsewhere on the internet, but I found him on TikTok, so that's where we're going to tackle him. Him and his 250,000 followers. Now we start with a TikTok of his where he's reviewing a video of a man talking about missing human bones. Interesting. Away we go.
Check this video out with me and stick around to the end. Have you ever asked the question, if it took apes 7 million years to evolve into humans, we should have found millions of ancient human remains up until this point, but we have yet to find any of them, only since the last 10,000 years. Let's go ahead and play it.
Population size over time, going all the way back to, they believe way before the Bible says the world was created.
There is a reason why we don't find a lot of fossils for humans/apes. It's because of the conditions that surrounded them when they likely died. Fossilization requires rapid burial in an oxygen-free environment, free from any decay or scavengers. The chances of that happening in the case of apes is extremely small, what with them being land mammals and all that.
But essentially, there's about 1 million people alive across the world for tens of thousands of years, and all of a sudden somebody invents farming, and that means that extra population can be handled because there's more food, and all of a sudden the population does that, and we have 7 billion people today. And how come the people with the same genes back here who were just as smart as people here, they didn't think of planting something in the ground and harvesting it the next year?
What an absolute ridiculous statement to make. That's like saying, how come those people in the 1500s didn't realise that all that metal they were ploughing into their swords and weapons, they could have just made a metal box instead and chucked some wheels on it and a 2-stroke engine? It would have been far easier to get about and send messages, etc., rather than just send a raven. Dark wings, dark words.
This is really magic back here. Right. Taking that thought, I applied that to a biblical idea where this is the flood. This is today. And starting from those 6 people, all you have to do is double the number of people every 156 years. And you arrive at 7 billion people after 4,500 years. Just about any model that has any growth at all, you can get this many people in those many years.
Not without immense amounts of incest, you can't. To start with just 6 people would be an extremely bad idea. That gene pool would likely mean a huge amount of genetic difficulties in later generations. I can't quite believe that they suggest this with a straight face. They know that such an idea would need several instances of procreation with family members.
So the human population size actually is a biblical human population size. If evolution was true and we existed for so many thousands of years before that, there should be trillions of people. Not that it's possible.
So you say there should be trillions of people, but then you say that shouldn't be possible. What's that about? Just to show you how ridiculous that statement is, let's take the notion of trillions to be, 5 trillion. That would mean that for every square metre of land on Earth, there would need to be 33 people occupying it.
Or someone should have invented farming earlier than that.
Yeah, for God's sake, why couldn't they have invented farming quicker? Bloody hell.
Or another way to ask it is this. If 1 million people live for about 1 million years, where are the trillions of bodies?
That's a really good question.
No, it's not. I don't even think he thinks that makes sense. Look at his face. If 1 million people live for 1 million years, where are the trillions of bodies? Well, you said there'd be 1 million people, so it would be 1 million people, wouldn't it? And besides that, only around 115 billion people have ever lived. And where are their bodies, you may ask? Well, buried, burnt in various forms, eaten by fauna, etc., etc.
They don't exist.
There's no bones down there.
Yeah, there are some ancient bones we found, great, but those are post-flood people.
Right.
There should be millions upon millions of cemeteries, old villages, and remains of people. We don't find them. I believe it's because they didn't exist.
Look at him walking off as if to say, well, that's a win. There are an estimated 144,000 cemeteries in the US alone. Who knows what that figure would be worldwide? Talking of the 6 people that apparently paved the way for the rest of humanity, his next TikTok talks about the actual bones of Noah and his family. Even though we apparently don't find bones of ancient humans, but there you go.
Check this video out because they just found the ancient remains of Noah and his family. Let's go ahead and play it.
They know to be Noah's ancient home. And the reason they know this is because there's a marker outside of these ruins. It's a giant stone with an inscription of a rainbow. Underneath the rainbow is a ship with animals coming off of it. And then there are 8 carved crosses representing 8 people that came off of the ark. And this was taken from a site that was a dug up grave at those ancient ruins of Noah's home.
These bones were found by Ron Wyatt, a man who was not an archaeologist, and he never carried out a licensed excavation. Answers in Genesis, the people responsible for Jesse Speaks' first TikTok we looked at, claimed that Ron's findings were fraudulent. Dear oh dear, Jesse.
And those are the finger bones.
That is one single finger, and this is a regular-sized woman's hand next to the finger, so that gives you an idea of how large that person's hand had to be.
Was this Mrs. Noah's finger?
It is believed that this was the grave of Mrs. Noah, and
Okay.
that is Mrs. Noah's finger.
And her name would have been Joan of Arc.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Was that a joke from Kent? Or a genuine attempt at claiming Noah's wife was a 15th century French martyr?
What is this bone here now? This is a thumb bone?
This is a thumb bone. Now, this is not connected to the Noah's Ark location. This was taken from another place in the Middle East, but that's an example. That's a real bone of how large somebody's thumb was, and you can see it in comparison next to Mary's thumb. It's a lot larger.
Of course, the evidence for this being human is not forthcoming. I wonder why. Let's just guess.
This toe bone has been examined by multiple actual scientists. None of them are willing to come out and say publicly that this is a toe bone because of backlash from the community. But every one of them said undeniably 100% this is a human toe bone.
It's a toe bone.
But see, the guy would have to be 15 feet tall to have a toe.
He would.
So none of them want to come out and say that it's a human toe bone, but they definitely said it's a human toe bone. Right. And we take your word for that, do we? Sure.
Yeah, and that's sitting in the palm of my hand. I have a pretty big hand, as you can see. That's in the palm of it. So that person would have to be easily 12 to 14 feet tall. And not only would their bones have to be longer, but they would have to be wider to sustain that much weight.
Here are some examples of mammoth toe bones. Here is an elephant's foot. Look at the size of those toe bones. My point is, this could be anything. You want to believe it's a human toe bone, but I'm afraid it's not.
Sure, but it was a different world back then. We know there were giant reptiles.
Mm-hmm.
We find the bones all over dinosaurs. They find fossil cockroaches 2 feet long. They find fossil dragonflies, 2-foot wingspan. Fossil grasshoppers 2 feet long. Why can they admit there was giant everything else and can't admit there were giant humans?
It would prove the scripture as a truth.
Because humans were not around then. Simple as that. But Jesse thinks that we clearly were, and he also seems to think that we once were able to live for up to 1,000 years. We need to fact check this one too. Here we go.
Are you guys ready to have your mind blown? Check this out. This right here is called the firmament. And that firmament was around during the biblical account of Adam and Eve. And knowing that Adam and Eve lived hundreds of years, along with Methuselah almost reaching 1,000, how was that even possible?
How indeed, Jesse.
Which brought me to my next question about how harmful the UV rays are to our planet. So by heading over to ChatGPT, we went ahead and asked that question. How thick would that firmament actually need to be to eliminate the UV rays that are hurting the planet? And then we got our answer. To be precise, a thickness of 300 Dobson units, or UD, is often used as a standard measurement for the total amount of overhead ozone that is considered necessary to provide adequate UV protection. This is great news! Now I just need to know what 300 Dobson units actually are.
Well, the Dobson unit is specifically related to the amount of ozone in any column of air. And 300 Dobson units, it turns out, is the equivalent of around 3 millimeters thick. And ozone is not a solid layer, by the way. It is a gas comprising of 3 oxygen molecules.
Shout out to NASA for the measurement. Upon scrolling on the website, we now see that it is 3 millimeters thick, which is the equivalent of stacking 2 pennies on top of each other. That doesn't appear to be very thick. So going back to our drawing with only 2 pennies worth of a firmament, we need to find out what's the point. So apparently by having extra UV protection, it actually stops the oxygen molecules from separating, creating even more oxygen down below. So what happens when we have more oxygen? But before we get too carried away, let's find out how much oxygen is actually here right meow. Based on an educated Google search, I typed in, what is the average oxygen level on Earth? Right meow. The answer is 21%. Which brought me to my second question. If it is 21% now here on Earth, what was it like way back when?
Here we go. A creationist who's going to accept science's answer for a time in which he didn't believe existed to try and then prove something which he believes. Amazing.
This is a mosquito. It's trapped in a fossilized piece of ember, and these are air bubbles. By taking the air, or oxygen, out of those tiny air bubbles, we were able to find out the oxygen content based on that particular period. The most obvious question to write is, what was the oxygen level during the dinosaurs? Coming to the very cool conclusion that the atmosphere of the Earth 80 million years ago was discovered to have 50% more oxygen than modern air. And by modern air, it's talking about the quality of the oxygen that we have now, which is only at 21%. Which brings me to my next question. With 50% more oxygen, the average oxygen at that time averaged 30%, meaning that this air was supercharged with oxygen.
All fantastic research, Jesse, but what does that exactly mean for you?
So what the Hello Kitty happens to people living in a world with more oxygen? With a spike of oxygen concentration, the atmosphere would become much thicker, scattering more sunlight, thus making the sky look more blue, which will also decrease temperature of the air. Very interesting. Oxygen is also the limiting factor for quality crop. The amount of oxygen available to root cells matters for healthy plant growth rate and a crop yield. So it made everything bigger and more nutritious, leaving room for crazy things like this giant human skeleton, or these ridiculously big hairless chickens, or this ridiculously large prehistoric vegetation. Because UV light in and of itself is not the only thing harming us. It's actually the diet that we also have, the lack of nutrients that we have, but all that was completely accounted for way back when. Which is why these guys could live so long.
Absolute nonsense, and I'll tell you why. Because humans have never lived on an Earth where the atmospheric oxygen content was 30%. Simple as that. Well, there we go. A very interesting look there at the creationist TikToker Jesse Speaks. Quite interesting that he's called that, because I remember looking at an evolutionary guy before who called himself Truth Speaks. He was wrong too. Let me know in the comments what you thought about his TikTok videos. I'll appreciate that. But for now, we are all done and dusted for another Tinfoil Tuesday. Thanks so much for watching. Again, it's truly appreciated. If you did enjoy this one, please do consider subscribing to the channel. You can also now join the new membership perks as well. Have a look at those. They're in the description. And of course, if you really enjoyed it, hit that thumbs up button too. I've been Simon Dan. Have yourselves a great day, a great week, and I'll see you all on Friday for the return of Nathan Oakley. See you then.